You were never the man I settled for.
I needed the truth. Everything is documented.
Then let the evidence speak. We know what to look for.
Who gave you this?
Mark Anderson was 43, a senior financial fraud investigator in Columbus, Ohio. Most people saw a quiet man who drove an old Ford F-150, wore inexpensive shirts, and never chased luxury. Even his wife, Camila, believed she had outgrown him. His calm routine, modest habits, and silent dinners made him easy to underestimate. What she didn't know was that every document, every receipt, and every secret had already been collected. On their anniversary dinner, Mark slowly removed his wedding ring, placed it beside his wine glass, and waited. Camilla smiled before speaking the one mistake neither of them could ever undo. If you're watching from somewhere in the world, let me know your country and your local time in the comments. I always enjoy seeing where these stories reach. And if you love slow-burn stories filled with unexpected twists, consider subscribing. Before we continue, tomorrow's story may change the way you see quiet people forever. Monday mornings always began the same way for Mark Anderson. His alarm sounded at 5:15 a.m. He was awake before it finished the second ring. By 5:40, he had already brewed Colombian coffee, read overnight financial crime bulletins, and completed a 4-mile run through the quiet neighborhoods west of downtown Columbus. The same route, the same pace. Rain rarely changed it. Discipline had become less of a habit than a language. At 6:45, his old silver Ford F-150 rolled into the parking garage beneath the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation's Financial Crimes Division. It was usually the oldest vehicle in the lot. No one ever laughed. The investigators who worked beside Mark knew appearances meant very little. Detective Aaron Mills often joked that Mark could solve a $1 million fraud by looking at a single spreadsheet. Mark never corrected him. He simply smiled. Inside the office, conversations were loud. Phones rang. Coffee machines hissed. Televisions quietly reported overnight financial news from New York. Mark walked past every distraction and entered his office without saying much. His desk reflected the man himself. Perfectly aligned folders, one family photograph, no awards displayed, no expensive watch, no personalized decorations. Just a black notebook, 2 sharpened pencils, and a computer displaying financial transaction reports. His supervisor, Karen Whitmore, stepped into his doorway carrying a thick folder. "I've got another healthcare fraud referral." Mark looked up. "Federal." Karen nodded. "They're estimating $28 million. He accepted the folder without excitement. "When do they need preliminary findings?" "Friday." "I'll have them Wednesday." Karen smiled. "That's why I brought it to you." After she left, Detective Aaron leaned into the doorway. "You ever think about slowing down?" Mark looked away from the monitor. "Evidence doesn't care how fast I move." Aaron laughed. "That's the most Mark Anderson answer I've ever heard." The office respected him because he never guessed. He verified. He never accused someone because of intuition. He accused them because every document, every timestamp, every dollar told exactly the same story. That reputation had taken almost 20 years to build. Outside the office, however, almost no one understood him. To neighbors, he was simply the quiet man who mowed his lawn every Saturday morning. To waitresses at Betty's family diner, he was the customer who ordered grilled chicken black coffee and always tipped exactly 25%. To strangers, he looked invisible. Camilla had once loved that quiet confidence. 12 years earlier, they had met inside a neighborhood bookstore. Mark had been searching for a biography of Warren Buffett. Camilla had been browsing travel magazines. She reached for the same shelf at the same moment. Their hands brushed. She laughed first. "You can go ahead." Mark shook his head. "You saw it first." She later admitted that his politeness stood out because it felt genuine instead of rehearsed. Their first date lasted 5 hours. Neither wanted it to end. They walked along the Kyoto Mile after dinner, talking about childhood dreams, favorite books, and places they hoped to visit someday. Back then, money rarely entered the conversation. Neither cared much about luxury. Their first apartment was only 700 square feet. The air conditioner barely worked during Ohio summers. The kitchen cabinets refused to close completely. The bathroom sink leaked every other week. Still, they laughed often. Pizza on Friday nights, secondhand furniture, road trips instead of flights. They built memories instead of appearances. When Mark proposed beside Alum Creek Lake, the engagement ring was modest. Camilla cried anyway. She told him she would rather build a life with a good man than inherit one with a rich one. For several years, she truly believed those words. Then life slowly changed. It never happened all at once. It rarely does. Rachel Simmons entered the picture after Camilla accepted a marketing position at a luxury interior design firm. Rachel possessed a talent that could not be listed on a resume. She made ordinary people feel inadequate. Every lunch conversation drifted toward expensive vacations, luxury SUVs, private schools, designer handbags, wine tastings in Napa Valley, investment properties in Scottsdale. Rachel never directly criticized anyone. She simply described her own life until comparisons became unavoidable. Her husband, Brian Mitchell, owned several commercial roofing companies throughout central Ohio. Money surrounded them effortlessly. Every social gathering seemed carefully designed to remind everyone else. Camilla initially laughed at Rachel's stories. Months later, she began repeating them at home. Rachel and Brian are thinking about buying a vacation house. Mark looked up from a reading. That's nice. They're only 41. He nodded. They've worked hard. Camilla waited. She wanted more. Instead, Mark turned another page. On another evening, she mentioned Brian's new Porsche. The following week, she talked about a friend's husband receiving stock options. Later came discussions about country clubs, exclusive restaurants, private investment groups. Every conversation carried the same silent question. Why aren't we living like them? Mark always answered calmly. We're comfortable. That answer gradually frustrated her more than any argument could have. Comfort was no longer enough. She wanted visible success. She wanted people to recognize it before she introduced herself. Social media accelerated everything. Pictures filled her evenings. Beach houses, luxury kitchens, weekend yacht trips, perfect marriages photographed under perfect sunsets. Mark rarely looked. He knew photographs revealed almost nothing. Camilla believed they revealed everything. One Friday evening, they attended Rachel and Brian's dinner party. 8 couples gathered around a polished walnut dining table. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath imported Italian lighting. Conversation eventually shifted toward careers. Brian smiled across the table. So, Mark, still chasing accountants around? A few guests laughed politely. Mark smiled. Sometimes. Brian grinned. I'd lose my mind doing paperwork all day. Mark sipped water. It isn't paperwork. What is it? People. Brian frowned. Mark continued quietly. The numbers simply tell me where to look. The room became silent for a brief moment. Then someone changed the subject. Driving home, Camilla stared out the passenger window. You could try harder. Mark glanced toward her. At what? Talking. I answered. You never impress anyone. Mark kept his eyes on the road. I've never tried. She folded her arms. Maybe that's the problem. The truck continued through the quiet streets without another word. Mark wasn't hurt by criticism itself. He was more interested in patterns. Individual comments meant little. Repeated behaviors mattered. Over the following months, similar conversations became more frequent. She criticized the truck. His clothes, their neighborhood, the vacations they didn't take, the investments they didn't make. She stopped asking about his work altogether. He noticed something else. Her phone gradually became inseparable from her. It never remained face up. She smiled at messages she never shared. She started taking evening walks after dinner. Business networking events appeared on her calendar. Weekend marketing conferences became increasingly common. None of those details proved anything. By themselves, they were meaningless. But Mark had spent 20 years learning that small inconsistencies often preceded much larger truths. One Thursday evening in late October, Camilla returned home almost 90 minutes later than expected. She apologized before he even asked. Traffic downtown was terrible. Mark simply nodded. She headed upstairs. 10 minutes later, while placing leftovers inside the refrigerator, Mark noticed something almost invisible. Her calendar hanging beside the pantry still listed today's client meeting. The meeting location was Polaris. Traffic from Polaris would never explain arriving from the opposite direction. He closed the refrigerator door slowly. He didn't confront her. He didn't speculate. He didn't assume. Instead, he quietly looked at the kitchen clock. Then he opened his small, black notebook for the first time in years. On a blank page, he wrote one sentence. October 24th. Arrival time inconsistent with stated location. He closed the notebook. The investigation had not begun. But for the first time, Mark realized it might have to. The note in Mark Anderson's black notebook occupied only one line. October 24th. Arrival time inconsistent with stated location. He closed the notebook and placed it back inside the locked drawer of his desk at home. That single sentence changed nothing, at least not yet. For 20 years, Mark had investigated financial criminals who rushed toward conclusions and destroyed their own cases. Honest investigators survived because they accepted one uncomfortable truth. Suspicion was not evidence. He refused to become the kind of man who searched for guilt instead of facts. The following morning, Camilla prepared breakfast exactly as she always did. 2 scrambled eggs, whole wheat toast, orange juice. She hummed softly while packing her work bag. Nothing appeared unusual. She kissed Mark on the cheek before leaving. "Don't work too late." "I won't." The front door closed. Mark finished his coffee without moving. If he had confronted her right then, she could have explained the previous evening with any number of believable stories. Traffic, a forgotten errand, meeting another client. None of those explanations could be disproved. He needed facts, not possibilities. 3 days later, another inconsistency appeared. Camilla mentioned having dinner with an important client from Cincinnati. "The meeting should finish around 9. She said while adjusting a silver necklace in the hallway mirror. Mark nodded. "I'll probably already be asleep." She smiled. "Don't wait up." At 8:10 that evening, Mark stopped at Betty's family diner after finishing work. The restaurant sat only 2 blocks from his office. The owner, Linda, poured coffee before he even reached his booth. The usual. Grilled chicken, mashed potatoes, black coffee. Simple, predictable. Halfway through dinner, his phone vibrated. Not a message. A banking notification. Their joint credit card had processed a charge. Restaurant. $286.43. The name immediately caught his attention. The Hawthorne Club. Mark knew the place. It was an exclusive private dining club overlooking downtown Columbus. It certainly wasn't in Cincinnati. He didn't react. Instead, he quietly opened his banking application. Time, 7:54 p.m. Location, downtown Columbus. Again, none of it proved infidelity. People entertained clients. Business dinners happened. But another detail stood out. The restaurant required membership. Camilla didn't have one. Someone else had paid the annual membership fee. Mark finished his meal, tipped Linda, drove home. At 9:38 p.m., Camilla arrived. "You look tired," she said. "Long day." She smiled. "The meeting went well." He looked up from his book. "Good. No accusation, no questions, no visible suspicion." She relaxed almost immediately. Mark noticed that more than anything else. People expecting confrontation often revealed themselves through relief when none came. Sunday afternoon brought another small discovery. Camilla left her purse on the kitchen island while taking a phone call outside. Mark had no intention of searching it. Instead, while cleaning the counter, a folded receipt partially slipped from an outside pocket. He almost ignored it. Then one printed line became visible. Valet parking. The Hawthorne Club. Date. The same Thursday night she claimed to be in Cincinnati. He never unfolded the receipt. He simply observed what was already exposed. The timestamp read 7:41 p.m. That was enough. Later that evening, after Camilla had gone upstairs, Mark opened his notebook. October 27th. Credit card charge confirms Hawthorne Club. Receipt matches transaction. Claimed location inconsistent. He closed the notebook. Still no conclusions. Only facts. Work continued as usual. Healthcare fraud occupied his mornings. Interviews filled his afternoons. Yet his investigative instincts had quietly awakened. Patterns. Every investigator trusted patterns. During the next 2 weeks, Camilla attended 4 separate networking events. 3 of them generated restaurant charges. All 3 occurred at places within 15 minutes of downtown Columbus. Each time she described being somewhere else, Mark noticed another pattern. Every event occurred on either Tuesday or Thursday. Never weekends, never Mondays, never Fridays. He began asking himself a different question. Who scheduled meetings that consistently the answer might reveal more than the meetings themselves? One Tuesday afternoon, Mark drove toward the county courthouse after interviewing a mortgage broker involved in an unrelated fraud case. Traffic slowed near High Street. While waiting at a red light, his eyes drifted toward the sidewalk cafe across the intersection. He almost looked away. Then he recognized Camilla. She wasn't alone. She sat across from a man wearing a tailored navy suit, early 40s, athletic build, dark hair streaked with gray at the temples. Confident posture. The man laughed. Camilla reached across the table. Her hand briefly touched his wrist. The traffic light turned green. Cars behind Mark began moving. He continued driving. He never reached for his phone, never took a photograph, never circled the block. One observation, nothing more. Back at the office, curiosity tempted him. Curiosity alone was dangerous. Evidence first? Questions later. That evening, he searched publicly available business records. No secret databases. No misuse of government resources. Only information any citizen could access. He searched recent commercial development projects in Columbus. One name appeared repeatedly. Tyler Bennett, founder and CEO, Bennett Capital Development, luxury condominium projects, high-rise apartment complexes, commercial redevelopment, magazine covers, business awards, television interviews, estimated net worth exceeding $60 million. Mark spent less than 20 minutes reading. Then he stopped. He had learned enough. The man from the cafe matched the photographs. Tyler Bennett. Mark closed the browser. Professional investigations always required emotional distance. He refused to spend hours studying another man simply because his wife had lunch with him. The following Friday, Rachel Simmons posted photographs on social media. Group dinner, elegant rooftop restaurant, 6 people, Brian Mitchell, Rachel, 2 unidentified couples, Camilla, Tyler Bennett. Mark enlarged the picture. Nothing inappropriate. Everyone smiled. Business attire, wine glasses, perfectly respectable. Then he noticed something nearly invisible. Tyler's left hand rested behind Camilla's chair. Not touching, not embracing. Simply positioned there. Most viewers would overlook it. Investigators rarely overlooked body language. It suggested familiarity. Not proof. Familiarity. Mark wrote another note. November 9th. Public appearance together. Repeated contact, still insufficient. Days became weeks. Camilla grew increasingly protective of her phone. She started locking her home office. She changed gym schedules without explanation. She purchased new dresses she had never discussed before. Mark noticed every change. He reacted to none. His silence became almost unsettling. Camilla occasionally studied him across the dinner table, as if waiting for questions. None came. The absence of conflict slowly lowered her guard. One rainy Wednesday evening, Mark returned home before she did. A plain white envelope rested inside the mailbox. No return address, no stamp. Someone had delivered it by hand. He carried it inside, opened it carefully. One photograph, glossy, professionally printed, taken through the front window of a restaurant. Camilla sat beside Tyler Bennett inside a private dining booth. They weren't discussing business. Tyler's hand held hers across the table. She was smiling the way she hadn't smiled at Mark in years. The timestamp in the lower corner read November 18th. Someone wanted Mark to see it. But whoever sent the photograph had included nothing else. No letter, no threat, no explanation. Mark looked at the image for nearly a full minute. His breathing never changed. His expression remained calm. Then he walked into his study, unlocked the bottom drawer, placed the photograph inside a clear evidence sleeve, labeled it, anonymous source, authenticity unverified. He closed the drawer. Outside headlights swept across the front window. Camilla had arrived home. Mark heard her keys. The front door opened. "I'm home," she called cheerfully. He closed the study door before answering. "So am I." Only one question remained. Who had sent the photograph? And why now Mark did not sleep much that night? Not because of the photograph. Because of the question it raised. Someone had risked walking onto his property simply to leave evidence in his mailbox. That meant another person knew about Camilla and Tyler Bennett. Whoever it was had chosen not to involve the police, not to expose the affair publicly, and not to contact Mark directly. Instead, they had quietly nudged him toward the truth. By 6 o'clock the next morning, the photograph had already been scanned, cataloged, and stored inside an encrypted digital archive on Mark's personal computer. He created a folder simply labeled Personal. Inside it were 3 subfolders: Timeline, Financial Records, Unknown Source. The photograph went into the last one. Nothing in that folder would ever be mixed with his government work. Mark drew a line that he refused to cross. His badge gave him authority. It did not give him permission to investigate his own marriage using public resources. He would conduct this investigation exactly as any private citizen should, legally, patiently, completely. At work, Karen Whitmore noticed something unusual. "You've been quieter than usual." Mark looked up from a stack of bank statements. "I thought that was impossible." She smiled. "It probably is." She hesitated. "Everything okay at home?" Mark answered without lying. "I've got a personal matter I'm working through." Karen didn't pry. She knew him well enough to understand that if Mark wanted advice, he would ask. Otherwise, silence meant he was still collecting information. That afternoon, he left the office exactly at 5. Instead of driving home, he stopped at a downtown office building occupied by several law firms. On the 14th floor worked Susan Keller. For nearly 25 years, Susan had specialized in complex divorces involving business owners, executives, and hidden assets. Mark had testified as an expert witness in 2 financial cases where she represented clients. She respected facts. He respected preparation. Her receptionist smiled. "Mr. Anderson, Miss Keller can see you now." Susan stood as he entered. "Mark, I wasn't expecting to see you outside a courtroom." "I hope I never do." She motioned toward a chair. "What brings you here?" Mark placed a sealed envelope on her desk. Inside were copies. The anonymous photograph, restaurant receipts, credit card statements, his written timeline. Nothing more, nothing less. Susan spent nearly 15 minutes reading every page without interruption. Finally, she removed her glasses. "Have you confronted your wife?" "No." "Does she know you're here?" "No." Susan nodded approvingly. "Good." She leaned back. "These documents establish a pattern of deception." "But not adultery." "No, they don't need to." Mark waited. Susan folded her hands. Your first priority isn't proving infidelity. It's protecting yourself. She began making notes. Separate copies of every financial statement, retirement accounts, insurance policies, mortgage documents, vehicle titles, tax returns. She continued, if this marriage ends, documentation today will save months of litigation later. Mark listened carefully. What about joint accounts? Don't empty them. I wasn't planning to. Good. Courts don't reward emotional decisions. She looked directly at him. Neither do I. Mark appreciated that answer. It sounded exactly like something he would tell a young investigator. Before leaving, Susan handed him a business card. My office opens a confidential file today. If nothing happens, we close it. If something does, we'll already be 6 months ahead. Mark thanked her and left. Outside, evening traffic flowed steadily through downtown Columbus. Most people hurried toward dinner, toward family, toward home. Mark drove instead toward the suburban office of David Chen. David had spent 18 years as one of Ohio's most respected forensic accountants. Unlike ordinary accountants, David specialized in following money through complicated corporate structures. Mark had met him while investigating an embezzlement case years earlier. David greeted him warmly. Mark Anderson asking for personal help usually means something serious. It is. Again, Mark shared only documents, only facts, never assumptions. David adjusted his reading glasses. I recognize this company. He pointed toward a receipt bearing Tyler Bennett's corporate logo. Bennett Capital Development. You've worked with them? No. But I've reviewed one acquisition they made last year. He frowned. Something felt strange. Mark remained silent. David continued flipping through the documents. You think your wife is involved with Bennett? I think she's spending time with Tyler Bennett. David nodded slowly. That's different. It is. He appreciated the distinction. Too many people confused suspicion with certainty. David opened his laptop. Everything he accessed came from public databases available to anyone willing to pay filing fees. Secretary of State business registrations, property transfers, corporate filings. Nothing confidential. Nothing illegal. Within 20 minutes, David turned the screen. You see these? Mark leaned closer. 4 limited liability companies. Different names. Different mailing addresses, different registered agents. David highlighted another column. Same accounting firm. Another click. Same legal counsel. Another. 3 of them purchased commercial property from Bennett Capital. So every transaction appears profitable. David paused. On paper. Mark understood immediately. Artificially inflated property values. A common technique in mortgage fraud. Not evidence. A possibility. David looked thoughtful. I'd want another week. Doing what? Following the ownership records. Quietly. Mark nodded. Do it. No reports. No assumptions. Only facts. David smiled. I wouldn't know any other way. The following Saturday, Mark spent the afternoon organizing financial documents inside his study. He scanned insurance records, investment statements, mortgage payments. Every file received identical labels. Dates, categories, digital backups. Camilla returned from shopping carrying 3 expensive clothing bags. She stopped in the doorway. Working. Just organizing paperwork? She laughed softly. You always organize paperwork. Mark smiled. I know. She walked upstairs without another question. Had she entered 5 minutes earlier, she would have seen folders labeled with attorney consultations. She had arrived 5 minutes too late. That evening, while taking trash to the curb, Mark noticed something across the street. A black Mercedes SUV, engine running, parked without lights. It remained there for less than 30 seconds, then pulled away. Perhaps a delivery driver. Perhaps someone waiting for directions. Perhaps nothing. Mark watched until the vehicle disappeared around the corner. No notebook. No assumptions. Not every observation deserved documentation. Sunday afternoon brought David's first phone call. "I found something." Mark closed the book he had been reading. "What?" "The LLCs. They're buying buildings from Bennett Capital." "I saw that." "Then they're refinancing them 6 weeks later. For more money. Much more." Mark said nothing. David continued. "The values don't make sense. Commercial appraisals don't increase 40% in 45 days. Mark knew exactly where this conversation was heading. Artificial inflation, higher loans, cash extraction, classic mortgage fraud. Still possibility, not proof. David lowered his voice. "Mark." "Yeah?" "I don't think this is just a rich developer hiding money." "What do you think?" "I think someone is manufacturing property values." Mark stared through the living room window. Outside, Camila sat on the backyard patio talking on her phone, laughing, completely unaware. "When can you know for certain?" Mark asked. "I'll need another week." "Take it." "I already planned to." After ending the call, Mark looked toward Camila. She waved cheerfully through the window. He waved back. She smiled. He smiled too. Neither expression reached their eyes. Late that evening, after Camilla had gone to bed, Mark opened his notebook again. He added only 3 new lines. Attorney retained. Financial review initiated. Possible corporate fraud connected to Tyler Bennett. He stopped writing. His marriage had begun as a personal matter. It no longer appeared to be only that. Somewhere beneath expensive restaurants, luxury developments, and carefully polished public images, there was another story waiting to be uncovered. And Mark had the growing suspicion that Tyler Bennett's affair might prove to be the smallest crime anyone would eventually discover. By the second week of December, Mark Anderson had stopped asking himself whether his marriage was changing. It already had. The only remaining question was how much of the truth remained hidden. He refused to let emotions answer that question. Facts would answer it. Everything else would wait. Every evening after work, he dedicated exactly 1 hour to organizing documents. Not searching, not spying, organizing. His study gradually transformed into something resembling the evidence room he had admired throughout his career. One cabinet contained financial records, another contained chronological notes, a third held digital backups stored on encrypted drives. Nothing dramatic, nothing theatrical, only order. Mark understood something that criminals often ignored. Courts trusted organization almost as much as evidence. People forgot conversations. Documents remembered them forever. 3 days after speaking with David Chen, Mark met Michael Torres. Michael operated a licensed private investigation agency just outside downtown Columbus. Before opening his own firm, he had spent 16 years working as a detective with the Columbus Police Department. Gray-haired, deliberate, almost impossible to surprise. Mark appreciated people who spoke only after thinking. Michael extended his hand. "It's been a long time." Mark nodded. "Too long." They sat inside a quiet conference room. Mark slid a thin folder across the table. Michael opened it. Restaurant receipts, the anonymous photograph, timeline entries, nothing more. After reading for several minutes, he looked up. "You want proof of an affair?" Mark answered immediately. "I want facts." Michael smiled slightly. "Good answer." He closed the folder. People hire private investigators because they want validation. They already believe they know the truth. You don't. I don't, Michael leaned back. My agency documents behavior. Not opinions. That's why I'm here. The investigator explained his methods carefully. Public surveillance, photography from lawful locations, vehicle observations, verification of meeting locations, no trespassing, no hacking, no illegal recordings, everything admissible, everything ethical. When do you want me to begin? Tomorrow. Michael nodded once. You'll hear from me only when I have something worth saying. Mark appreciated that more than any promise of quick results. Real investigations were measured in patience. Not days, not headlines, patience. That same afternoon, Mark returned to Susan Keller's office. She had already begun assembling financial worksheets. Any changes? Mark placed another envelope on her desk. Private investigator retained. Susan checked another item on her legal checklist. Good. She opened a second folder. I've reviewed every financial account connected to your marriage. She turned several pages. Most of your retirement savings are protected because they predate the marriage. Mark nodded. I expected that. The house is straightforward. Vehicles are straightforward. She paused. But there's something I'd like you to do immediately. What? Open a new checking account. Only in your name. Have your paycheck deposited there? No. She shook her head. Not yet. Simply establish it. If circumstances change, you'll already have independent banking. Mark agreed. On his way home, he stopped at Huntington National Bank. The process required less than 30 minutes. One account, minimal opening deposit, no drama, another quiet layer of preparation. Nothing in his daily routine changed afterward. His paycheck still entered the joint account. Household bills were still paid exactly on time. Christmas decorations still appeared on the front porch. Neighbors would never have guessed that an experienced divorce attorney had already prepared the framework for ending the marriage. Mark wanted it that way. At home, Camilla seemed unusually cheerful. Rachel Simmons had invited several couples to a holiday cocktail party. You'll come, won't you? Camilla asked. If you'd like me to. I would, Mark smiled. Then I'll be there. The party occupied the entire top floor of an upscale downtown hotel. Christmas music drifted through the ballroom. Servers carried silver trays filled with champagne. Business owners exchanged handshakes beneath towering decorated trees. Mark rarely attended these events. When he did, he spent more time observing than speaking. Brian Mitchell spotted him almost immediately. There he is. The accountant. Mark smiled politely. I'm still not an accountant. Brian laughed. Close enough. Rachel joined them. Mark, you work too much. Camilla answered before he could. He doesn't know how to stop. Everyone laughed. Mark did too, only briefly. Across the room, Tyler Bennett entered. Perfectly tailored tuxedo, confident smile. People gravitated toward him almost instantly. Investors, developers, bank executives. He moved through the ballroom as though he owned it. Perhaps he believed he did. Mark watched only long enough to identify faces. Nothing more. Half an hour later, he stepped onto the outdoor terrace for fresh air. Snow drifted quietly over downtown Columbus. Footsteps approached behind him. You must be Mark. Mark turned. Tyler Bennett extended his hand. I've heard a lot about you. Mark accepted the handshake. I imagine only good things. Tyler smiled confidently. Camilla says you're one of the smartest financial investigators in Ohio. Mark glanced toward the ballroom. That's generous. Tyler rested both hands in his coat pockets. I've always admired government investigators. You people notice things everyone else misses. Mark held his gaze. We try. Tyler laughed. I'm glad you're on the good guy's side. So am I. Neither man smiled afterward. The silence lasted only a few seconds before another guest called Tyler's name. He excused himself. Mark watched him disappear back into the crowd. The conversation had been completely ordinary, yet something lingered. Tyler had introduced himself. Not because he needed to, because he wanted to. Confident people often enjoyed meeting those they believed they had already outsmarted. Later that evening, while driving home, Camila seemed unusually animated. "Tyler really liked you." "I'm glad." "He said you're incredibly calm." Mark kept both hands on the steering wheel. "Did he?" "He thinks you'd make a great consultant for private companies." Mark nodded once. "I'm happy where I am." She sighed. "You always are." The sentence lingered inside the truck, not as criticism, as disappointment. When they arrived home, Camila went upstairs. Mark entered his study. His phone vibrated. Michael Torres. "I've got something," Mark answered. "I'm listening." "The surveillance started yesterday." "And your wife met Tyler Bennett." "I expected that," Michael continued. "They weren't alone." Mark waited. There were two other men. They met inside Bennett Capital's executive offices. No dinner. No hotel. Business meeting. Mark frowned slightly. "Anything unusual?" "A courier delivered several banker boxes. Everyone carried them into the conference room. They stayed nearly 3 hours." "What happened afterward?" "Your wife left." "The boxes didn't." Mark wrote nothing. He simply listened. Michael continued. "I photographed everyone entering. I'll deliver copies tomorrow." After ending the call, Mark sat quietly. His marriage had introduced him to Tyler Bennett. But Tyler's business now interested him far more than Tyler's relationship with Camila. Banker boxes, late-night meetings, private conference rooms. Something significant was happening behind those glass walls. The next morning, David Chen called before sunrise. His voice carried something Mark hadn't heard before. Excitement. "I finished tracing the LLCs. And they aren't just connected. They're cycling money." Mark straightened in his chair. "Explain." David took a slow breath. "Properties are being sold between companies that secretly share ownership. Each sale inflates the appraisal. Each inflated appraisal produces larger commercial loans. The borrowed money disappears into consulting fees." Mark was silent. David continued. "I've checked 9 properties. The pattern repeats every time." Mark looked toward the dark window of his study. "Can you prove it?" "Not yet." "But I'm close." "Very close." Mark closed his notebook. Outside, dawn had barely begun to brighten the winter sky. Inside Bennett Capital, someone had spent years constructing what appeared to be a perfectly legitimate real estate empire. If David was right, the entire empire might actually be built on numbers that had never been real. The week before Christmas brought the first real crack in Tyler Bennett's carefully polished image. Not in the newspapers, not on television. Inside a spreadsheet. David Chen arrived at Mark's house carrying nothing more than a slim laptop and a yellow legal pad. Snow covered the driveway. The neighborhood looked peaceful. Children were building snowmen across the street. Christmas lights blinked from nearly every porch. Nothing about the quiet suburban afternoon suggested that 2 men were about to discuss what might become one of the largest financial fraud schemes in central Ohio. Mark welcomed David into the study. Coffee was already waiting. David placed the laptop on the desk. "I've checked every transaction I could legally access." Mark sat without speaking. David turned the screen toward him. Rows of commercial properties filled the monitor. Warehouse complexes, luxury condominiums, office buildings, mixed-use developments. Every one of them connected directly or indirectly to Bennett Capital Development. "I expanded beyond the 4 LLCs. David pointed to another chart. "There are 19. 19 shell companies." David nodded. "On paper, they're independent. In reality, they move money between one another." He clicked another file. Colored arrows connected one corporation to another. Blue, green, red. The chart resembled a spider web. If someone didn't map it visually, David said. They'd never notice. Mark studied the diagram. Walk me through one transaction. David highlighted a commercial building purchased 18 months earlier. Bennett Capital buys the property for $9 million. 6 weeks later, it sells to Riverside Holdings. Who owns Riverside? Officially, an investment group. Actually, he clicked again, the managing member is another LLC, which is owned by another. And eventually, David followed the chain. One signature appears over and over. Tyler Bennett. Mark remained silent. The property gets appraised at nearly $13 million. Based on what? David shrugged. Optimistic projections. Inflated market assumptions. Creative paperwork. Then, Riverside refinances. The bank issues a loan based on $13 million. The excess cash leaves through consulting contracts. Mark leaned back. So the building becomes collateral for money that never should have existed. Exactly. David closed the laptop halfway. I've verified this pattern 9 separate times. Mark looked toward the window. Snow continued falling. Each flake disappeared against the frozen ground. Quiet, methodical, almost invisible. Fraud often looked exactly the same. David broke the silence. There's something else. Mark looked back. I searched every public lawsuit involving Bennett Capital. And very few. Too few. What do you mean? Companies this large usually face dozens. Contract disputes, construction delays, vendor disagreements. But Bennett settles almost everything privately. Mark understood. Money bought silence. Sometimes legally, sometimes not. David continued. That tells me Tyler manages reputation as carefully as finances. Mark nodded once. He understands appearances. So does Camilla. The words escaped before Mark intended them to. David didn't respond immediately. Instead, he asked quietly, How are you holding up? Mark thought for a moment. I've been asking myself that. And I'm disappointed, but not distracted. David smiled faintly. Good. You'll need that. The conversation shifted back to numbers. Nothing emotional, nothing speculative. Exactly the way Mark preferred. After David left, Mark organized every document inside a new folder labeled Corporate Analysis. He deliberately separated it from personal evidence. One involved his marriage. The other involved potential criminal conduct. The distinction mattered. Around 6 o'clock, Camilla returned home carrying several expensive shopping bags. Merry Christmas to me, she laughed. Mark helped carry them inside. Find everything. Almost. She placed designer clothing across the living room sofa. Rachel convinced me to splurge. Mark recognized several luxury brands, far beyond what their household budget normally allowed. He asked calmly, Using your bonus? She smiled. Mostly. Mostly. Another interesting word. Not a lie, not necessarily the truth. Mark simply nodded. That evening, she disappeared upstairs for almost an hour. When she returned, she looked unusually relaxed. Her phone rested face down beside her on the couch. It vibrated twice. She ignored it. The third vibration came less than a minute later. She immediately picked it up. I'll be right back. She stepped into the kitchen. Mark never tried to overhear. Instead, he noticed the clock. 7:23. She returned exactly 4 minutes later. Everything okay? He asked the question casually. She smiled. Just Rachel? Mark nodded. No notebook, no accusation. Not every statement deserved immediate examination. Sometimes later evidence answered earlier questions. The next morning, Michael Torres called. I've completed 10 days of surveillance. What did you find? There are definitely regular meetings. Mark picked up a pen. Michael continued. Not romantic. Professional. Mostly. Mark waited. Your wife visits Bennett Capital every Tuesday, usually between 6 and 9 p.m., always after normal business hours. Who else attends? Different people. Attorneys, bank representatives, accounting consultants. Mark frowned slightly. Consultants? Yes. Michael paused. And there's something unusual. What? No meeting minutes. No visible assistants. No reception staff. The executive floor empties before these meetings begin. Mark looked down at his notes. Private, restricted, consistent, highly organized. What are they carrying? Boxes. Binders. External hard drives. Sometimes portable shredders. Mark stopped writing. Portable shredders. Twice. That detail lingered. Portable shredders rarely appeared in legitimate meetings. They appeared when people wanted documents destroyed before leaving a building. Michael continued. I also noticed another person. Who? A woman. Late 50s. Always arrives separately. Always leaves last. Never speaks to anyone in the parking garage. Can you identify her? I already did. A pause. Linda Carver. Mark recognized the name immediately. One of Ohio's most respected commercial real estate attorneys. She had represented billion-dollar developments throughout the Midwest. If Linda Carver attended these meetings, the discussions involved much more than an affair. Mark thanked Michael. Then he made no further calls. Instead, he drove to work. His own investigations filled the morning: healthcare fraud interviews, insurance billing reviews, electronic bank transfers, ordinary work. Yet every fraudulent pattern he uncovered reminded him of David's charts. Complex financial crimes always relied on one assumption, that nobody would connect every piece. At lunch, Karen Whitmore entered his office. You've got visitors. Mark looked up. 2 FBI agents waited in the conference room. Neither wore jackets displaying agency markings. Professional, low profile. Karen smiled. They're here about an old mortgage case. Mark stood. The meeting lasted only 20 minutes. Routine information sharing between agencies, nothing connected to Tyler Bennett. Or so it appeared. As Mark escorted the agents toward the elevator, the older agent paused. You still know David Chen? I do. Tell him he's one of the best forensic accountants I've ever worked with. I will. The elevator doors closed. Mark watched them disappear. Interesting timing, nothing more. That evening, David called again. I remembered something. What? 5 years ago, I was asked to review one Bennett Capital acquisition. You mentioned that. I couldn't prove anything. But the loan officer who approved it, Mark waited, resigned 2 months later. Mark's attention sharpened. Do you know where he works now? I checked. He doesn't. He disappeared from banking altogether. The silence between them lasted several seconds. Finally, David spoke again. I think someone has been protecting Tyler for years. Mark closed his eyes briefly. Power, money, carefully managed appearances. Suddenly the pieces fit together far better than he wanted them to. His marriage had accidentally placed him within reach of something much larger than betrayal. Camilla believed she was chasing a wealthy, successful man. She had no idea she might already be standing inside the center of a criminal enterprise. And somewhere inside Bennett Capital's executive offices, someone had begun quietly destroying documents before anyone even knew investigators were getting close. January arrived with clear skies, frozen sidewalks, and a silence that settled over the Anderson house more heavily than the winter snow. Mark Anderson noticed it the first morning after New Year's Day. Camilla no longer asked how his day had gone. He no longer expected her to. Their conversations had become polished routines. Good morning. Drive safely. Dinner's in the oven. Good night. Nothing sounded hostile. Nothing sounded warm. Two people could share the same house while quietly living separate lives. Mark had accepted that reality weeks earlier. He simply needed to know when to bring it to an end. On the first Monday of January, Susan Keller called. "I've completed the preliminary divorce package." Mark listened quietly. "It won't be filed until you authorize it." "I understand." "None. I've also prepared temporary financial protection orders if they're needed." "Hopefully they won't be." "They rarely are," Susan replied. "But preparation is cheaper than regret." Mark thanked her and ended the call. He looked at the framed wedding photograph sitting on a shelf in his study. The picture had been taken 12 years earlier. He remembered every detail. Camilla laughing as the wind caught her veil. His father straightening his tie before the ceremony. His mother crying quietly in the second row. Everyone in that photograph believed the future would be simple. None of them could have imagined this. He picked up the frame, looked at it for a long moment, then placed it carefully inside a storage box. Not because he hated the memory, because he had stopped living inside it. 3 days later, Michael Torres requested a meeting. They met inside the same quiet conference room where the investigation had begun. Michael placed a thick envelope on the table. "I've finished 6 weeks of surveillance." Mark opened the folder. Inside were photographs. Tyler Bennett entering Bennett Capital after business hours. Camilla arriving 20 minutes later. Commercial bankers. Corporate attorneys. Outside consultants. Boxes carried into conference rooms. Boxes leaving through underground parking garages. One photograph immediately stood out. Tyler and Camilla exited the building together shortly before midnight. No embrace, no kiss. But Tyler rested his hand gently against the middle of her back while guiding her toward his car. Professional colleagues rarely touched each other that way. Michael folded his arms. "I can now confirm an ongoing intimate relationship." Mark slowly closed the folder. "Thank you." Michael watched him carefully. "I've seen people react very differently to this." Mark nodded. "I know. You don't seem angry." "I was angry. The day I realized I needed evidence." Michael said nothing. Mark continued. "Anger lasts hours. Preparation lasts forever." For the first time since accepting the case, Michael smiled. "I think that's why you'll be okay." Before leaving, he handed Mark one final document. Vehicle registration records, nothing confidential, entirely public. Tyler Bennett owned 6 luxury vehicles. One immediately caught Mark's attention, a black Mercedes SUV. License plate matched the vehicle he had briefly noticed parked across from his house weeks earlier. He didn't jump to conclusions. Perhaps Tyler had simply driven through the neighborhood. Perhaps someone else had borrowed the vehicle. But another small piece had quietly fallen into place. That evening, David Chen called. "I've reached the point where I can't go further." Mark understood immediately. "You've found enough. I've found enough to believe federal investigators should review it." "Can you prove criminal intent?" "No." "Can I prove fraudulent financial patterns?" "Absolutely." Mark looked out the study window. "What would you do?" David answered without hesitation. "I'd stop investigating privately. And I'd hand everything to the proper authorities." Mark had already reached the same conclusion. He had never intended to become the investigator in Tyler Bennett's case. He simply needed to recognize when private observations became matters of public interest. The next morning, he arranged a confidential meeting through professional channels, not using favors, not using friendships, following exactly the same procedures any citizen would use when submitting evidence related to suspected financial crimes. He transferred only documents connected to the corporate transactions, nothing involving Camilla, nothing involving his marriage. Those remained separate, always separate. The appointment lasted less than 45 minutes. When he left the federal building, he carried no copies. The evidence now belonged to the system. Justice worked best when procedures remained untouched by emotion. Later that afternoon, his phone buzzed. Rebecca Collins, the FBI special agent David had mentioned months earlier. Mr. Anderson? Yes. This is Special Agent Rebecca Collins. I understand you've submitted documentation. I have. I won't discuss any active matters. I wouldn't expect you to. There was a brief pause. I do have one question. Go ahead. Did you obtain every document legally? Yes. Can you certify that? I can. Thank you. The conversation ended there. No promises, no hints, no dramatic revelations. Exactly the kind of conversation Mark respected. At home that evening, Camilla appeared unusually excited. I have good news. Mark looked up from his book. I'm listening. I made reservations. For what? Our anniversary. He blinked once. Their anniversary fell only 2 weeks away. She smiled brightly. The Prime Oak Steakhouse. You've wanted to go there for years. Mark recognized the restaurant immediately. One of the finest steakhouses in Columbus. Reservations often required months. That's thoughtful. I figured we should spend more time together. She sounded sincere. Perhaps she even believed it. Mark searched her face. Nothing revealed what had motivated the sudden change. Guilt, convenience, strategy, hope. He couldn't know, and he refused to guess. When? Saturday evening. I'll be there. She walked around the table and kissed his cheek. I'm glad. After she left the room, Mark remained perfectly still. Their anniversary dinner. The timing felt almost impossibly precise. Susan had completed the divorce documents. Michael had confirmed the affair. David had finished tracing the financial network. Federal authorities now possessed the corporate evidence. Every significant preparation was complete. Only one step remained unfinished. Mark opened the drawer beside his desk. Inside rested his wedding ring box. He removed the ring from his finger. Not to abandon it, only to look at it. The gold showed 12 years of tiny scratches, invisible from a distance, obvious up close, rather like a marriage. He rotated the ring slowly beneath the desk lamp. How strange he thought that so much hope could fit inside something weighing only a few grams. He placed it back on his finger, not because he intended to keep wearing it forever, because its final purpose had not yet arrived. Across the hallway, Camilla laughed while talking on her phone. Mark couldn't hear the words. He didn't try. He simply closed the drawer and turned off the light in his study. The anniversary reservation had been made. The stage was finally set. And somewhere deep inside, Mark understood that the next dinner they shared would also be the last meal they would ever eat as husband and wife. Saturday arrived cold and bright. The sky above Columbus carried the pale blue color that only appeared after a hard winter freeze. Every rooftop glittered beneath a thin layer of snow, and the city looked cleaner than it had in months. Mark Anderson woke before dawn, not because he was nervous, because routine had never abandoned him. He completed his morning run, brewed coffee, read the financial pages, watered the small fern beside the kitchen window. Every movement carried the same precision that had defined his life for decades. Across the hall, Camilla slept later than usual. She finally appeared just after 8, wearing a silk robe and an unusually cheerful smile. Happy anniversary, she said. Happy anniversary. She stepped forward and kissed his cheek. For a brief moment, Mark remembered another anniversary years ago, when they had celebrated with takeout pizza because neither of them could afford a fancy restaurant. She had laughed when the delivery driver forgot the drinks. They had danced barefoot in the living room afterward. That memory felt like it belonged to someone else. Camilla poured herself coffee. I'm getting my hair done this afternoon. I thought I'd wear the black dress you like. Mark nodded politely. It always looked nice. She smiled. I knew you'd say that. She seemed relaxed, comfortable. Whatever doubts she had once carried had disappeared. She believed she understood her husband completely. Quiet, predictable, forgiving. She believed tonight would be another conversation that ended exactly as she expected. Mark finished his breakfast. I'll leave the reservation in your hands. It's at 7. I'll meet you there. She looked surprised. We're not driving together. I've got one errand after work. She shrugged. That's fine. Neither of them mentioned that they had not truly spent an evening together in months. By mid-morning, Mark drove to Susan Keller's office. She greeted him without ceremony. The documents are ready. She handed him a leather portfolio. Inside rested everything: the divorce petition, financial disclosures, asset inventories, temporary agreements, every signature except one already completed. Susan watched him carefully. You still have time to change your mind. Mark looked down at the papers. I'm not changing my mind. I'm making sure I never regret how I handled it. She nodded. That's the difference. He signed the final page. Susan placed the documents back inside the portfolio. They'll be filed Monday morning. Unless I call. Correct. He thanked her. Before leaving, Susan spoke one final sentence. Don't let tonight become an argument, Mark answered quietly. It won't. From there, he drove to his office. Not because he had work to finish, because he wanted one final hour surrounded by something familiar. The Financial Crimes Division felt almost empty on a Saturday afternoon. Detective Aaron Mills noticed him first. Working on your anniversary, Mark smiled. Just organizing a few things. Aaron laughed. My wife would kill me. Mark looked around the quiet office. Rows of desks, stacks of files, computer monitors sleeping beneath dim lights. He had spent 20 years chasing lies through numbers. Tonight he would end the only investigation that had ever truly hurt him. At 4:30, he shut down his computer, locked his office, walked out without looking back. Prime Oak Steakhouse stood on the top floor of a restored brick building overlooking the Scioto River. Soft jazz floated through hidden speakers. Crystal chandeliers reflected against polished walnut walls. Every table overlooked the city skyline. Mark arrived 10 minutes early. The hostess smiled. Mr. Anderson? Yes. Your wife is already here. Of course she was. Camilla believed appearances mattered. Being seated first fit the image she wanted. She stood as he approached. The black dress fit perfectly, elegant, tasteful, beautiful. For a moment, Mark understood why Tyler Bennett had noticed her. She smiled warmly. You look nice. So do you. The waiter poured wine. Menus were opened. Small talk filled the first 15 minutes. Work, weather, Rachel's upcoming birthday party, Brian's newest business acquisition. Nothing important. The appetizers arrived. Neither touched them immediately. Camilla studied him. You've been different lately. Mark cut a small piece of bread. Have I? Quieter. I've always been quiet. She laughed softly. Not like this. He simply nodded. The waiter cleared the appetizer plates. Steaks arrived. Medium rare for Mark. Filet mignon for Camilla. The restaurant buzzed with conversations around them. Anniversaries, business dinners, birthday celebrations. Nobody noticed the couple seated near the window. Nobody imagined their marriage was ending. Halfway through the meal, Mark reached for his water glass. His left hand paused above the table. Slowly, deliberately. He slipped the gold wedding band from his finger. The movement took only seconds, yet it felt impossibly long. The ring rested beside his wine glass. Its faint, metallic sound disappeared beneath the quiet music. Camilla stared at it. Her smile faded. What are you doing? Mark folded his hands calmly. I've been thinking. She glanced at the ring again. This isn't funny. I wasn't trying to be funny. Silence settled between them. The waiter approached, noticed their expressions, turned away without interrupting. Camilla leaned forward. Is this about us? Yes. You're finally going to tell me you've known. Mark looked into her eyes. I've known enough. She exhaled slowly. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of fear, she laughed. A quiet laugh, almost sympathetic. Mark watched without reacting. She shook her head. I wondered how long it would take. He remained silent. Her confidence grew. I thought you'd yell. You never yell. I thought maybe you'd cry. You never cry either. She picked up her wine glass. I guess I underestimated just how predictable you are. Mark said nothing. She mistook his silence for weakness. Again. She set the glass down carefully. If this is your way of asking me to choose, she smiled. You're too late. Still no response. The words came easier now, sharper, crueler. I was never in love with the man sitting across from me. Mark's heartbeat remained steady. She continued. I loved the idea of stability. The paycheck. The safety. But you... She looked directly at him. You were never the man I settled for. A brief pause. You were the mistake I learned to live with. The sentence landed without sound. No shouting followed, no tears, no dramatic scene. Only silence. Mark looked at her for several seconds. Then he nodded once. So that's the truth. She crossed her arms. It always was. He reached into his jacket. Not for evidence, not for divorce papers, only for the dinner check that had just arrived. He placed his credit card inside without looking at the amount. Camilla frowned. That's it. Mark looked at the wedding ring resting between them. No. He gently pushed it across the table. It belonged to a marriage. His voice never changed. It doesn't belong to this conversation. The waiter returned, processed the payment, thanked them, completely unaware that 12 years of marriage had ended while he carried away empty plates. Mark stood, buttoned his coat, picked up nothing except his wallet. Camilla watched him. You don't have anything else to say? He met her eyes one final time. I needed to hear you say it. She frowned. What? The truth. He turned towards the exit. And now I have. Without another word, Mark walked out of Prime Oak Steakhouse. Behind him, Camilla remained seated beside the wedding ring, still believing she had won the final conversation. She had no idea that every meaningful decision had already been made long before either of them entered the restaurant. Mark drove home through falling snow without turning on the radio. The city lights blurred against the windshield as the wipers swept steadily back and forth. Traffic moved slowly across the bridge spanning the Scioto River, but he felt no impatience. The most difficult conversation of his life had already happened. Everything that followed would simply be procedure. He reached home shortly after 9. Camilla's car was still absent. He expected that. Whether she remained at the restaurant or called Tyler Bennett no longer mattered. Mark unlocked the front door. The house greeted him with silence. For 12 years, this place had represented stability. Now it felt like a property awaiting transfer. He removed his coat, hung it neatly beside the door, walked into his study. The leather portfolio from Susan Keller rested exactly where he had left it that morning. He opened it, read every page once more. Not because he doubted his decision, because details mattered. Addresses, account numbers, legal descriptions. Every sentence had been checked repeatedly over the past month. He signed one final acknowledgement page, placed everything back inside. Then he locked the portfolio inside his desk. At 10:14 p.m., headlights illuminated the driveway. Camilla entered carrying her purse and winter coat. She looked exhausted. Not devastated, not frightened, only irritated. She stopped when she saw Mark sitting in the living room reading. "You came home." "I live here." She removed her gloves. "I thought maybe you'd stay somewhere else tonight." "No." Another silence. She walked into the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water. Finally, she spoke without looking at him. "You embarrassed me." Mark closed his book. "I don't think I did." "You took off your ring in the middle of dinner." "I did." "People noticed." Mark answered calmly. "I wasn't trying to make a scene." She laughed bitterly. "You succeeded anyway." He studied her quietly. The confidence she had displayed at the restaurant had faded, not because she regretted what she had said, because she had expected him to argue, to beg, to negotiate. Instead, he had simply left. People accustomed to controlling conversations rarely knew what to do when the other person refused to fight. Camilla leaned against the kitchen counter. "Are you going to tell everyone?" Mark answered immediately. "No." She looked surprised. "My family?" "No." "Rachel?" "No." "Your co-workers?" "No." She frowned. "Why?" "Because this isn't a public performance. It's a private ending." Those words seemed to unsettle her more than anger would have. She searched his face. "I don't understand you." "I know." She stared at him another moment, then quietly went upstairs. The next morning, Sunday, began much like every other. Mark made coffee, read the newspaper, cleared snow from the driveway. Camilla remained in the bedroom until nearly 11. When she finally came downstairs, she looked as though she had barely slept. Neither mentioned the anniversary dinner. Shortly before noon, Mark's phone vibrated. Susan Keller. "Good morning." "Morning. I wanted to confirm. We're filing tomorrow at 8:30. "Yes." "No changes." "No." "I'll notify you once it's accepted." "Thank you." The call ended. Camilla had been standing only a few feet away. She had heard nothing except his brief responses. What was that? Work. Not technically a lie. His divorce attorney was now part of his work toward closing one chapter of his life. That afternoon, Michael Torres arrived at the house by prior arrangement. Camilla had gone shopping. Mark invited him into the study. Michael carried another sealed envelope. "I debated whether to bring this." Mark accepted it. "What is it?" "Surveillance from last night." Mark looked up. "You followed them after the restaurant." "I was already nearby." Inside the envelope rested 6 photographs. Camilla leaving Prime Oak Steakhouse. Tyler Bennett arriving 10 minutes later. The two embracing beside Tyler's Mercedes. Another photograph showed them entering a luxury condominium overlooking the river. Timestamp 9:42. p.m. Michael spoke quietly. "I figured you'd eventually need complete documentation." Mark looked at each photograph once. No more. He placed them back into the envelope. "Thank you." Michael hesitated. "You don't want to keep looking?" "I've already seen enough." "You're sure?" Mark nodded. "My decision wasn't waiting on these." Michael understood. Evidence had already served its purpose. Additional betrayal changed nothing. Before leaving, Michael asked one final question. "What happens now?" Mark answered simply. "I move forward." Monday morning arrived clear and painfully cold. At exactly 8:37 a.m., Susan Keller called. "It's filed." Mark stood beside the window overlooking downtown Columbus. "Any issues?" "None." "I'll have confirmation by this afternoon." He thanked her. The marriage had now entered the legal process. There would be no dramatic confrontation, no negotiation over whether the relationship should continue, only orderly procedure. Less than an hour later, his office receptionist announced another call. Special Agent Rebecca Collins. "Mr. Anderson?" Agent Collins. I wanted to inform you that the materials you submitted have been reviewed. Mark remained silent. We've opened a preliminary inquiry. I appreciate knowing. I can't discuss specifics. I understand. She paused briefly. Your documentation was exceptionally organized. Mark almost smiled. I've had good teachers. After hanging up, he returned to work. Insurance fraud interviews filled most of the afternoon. Yet something had changed inside him. The weight that had followed him for weeks had begun to lift. Not because justice had arrived, because uncertainty had left. At 5:15, as he walked toward the parking garage, Karen Whitmore caught up with him. You seem different. Mark looked at her. Different how? Lighter. He considered the observation. Maybe I finally stopped carrying something. Karen nodded. I hope whatever it was stays behind you. So do I. When Mark arrived home that evening, an unfamiliar black SUV sat across the street. Engine off, windows tinted. He noticed it immediately. So did years of investigative training. He parked in his driveway. The SUV remained motionless. No one exited. No one approached. As he unlocked his front door, the vehicle quietly pulled away. Slowly, without attracting attention. Mark watched until it disappeared around the corner. Inside, Camila stood in the living room holding a large envelope. Her expression had completely changed. Gone was the confidence. Gone was the superiority. She looked pale, confused, almost frightened. She raised the envelope with trembling hands. What is this? Mark recognized Susan Keller's law firm's return address. The divorce papers had arrived. He removed his gloves, closed the front door. It's exactly what it says. She stared at him in disbelief. You already hired a lawyer. Several weeks ago. Her face drained of color. You planned all of this. Mark met her eyes calmly. No. I prepared for it. She slowly lowered the envelope. For the first time since the affair had begun, Camila realized she had never been one step ahead of her quiet husband. She had been several steps behind him all along. Camila stood frozen in the middle of the living room. The large envelope remained open in her hands. Its contents trembled almost as much as her fingers. Mark removed his scarf, placed it neatly on the hallway table, and walked toward the kitchen. He filled a glass with water before saying another word. Behind him, paper rustled. You filed already? Mark took a sip. Yes. You didn't even tell me. I didn't need permission. She followed him into the kitchen. When? This morning. Her breathing became uneven. You planned everything. I prepared everything. That's the same thing. No. He looked at her calmly. It isn't. She stared at him, waiting for anger, waiting for accusation, waiting for a fight. Instead, she found only composure. The silence unsettled her more than shouting ever could. She placed the divorce papers on the counter. We should talk. We are. No. She shook her head. I mean really talk. Mark folded his hands. I listened Saturday night. You said everything you wanted to say. Color rose into her face. I was angry. You were honest. Those aren't always the same. No. But sometimes they overlap. Camila looked away. For the first time in weeks, she appeared uncertain. Not guilty, not remorseful. Uncertain. She searched for words that would restore control over the conversation. Finally, she asked, How long have you known? Mark answered without hesitation. I suspected something before Thanksgiving. And you never confronted me? I preferred facts. You could have asked. I did. She frowned. When several times. You answered. He paused. I simply verified your answers afterward. She lowered her eyes. The meaning reached her immediately. Every late meeting, every business dinner, every explanation. Mark had quietly measured each one against reality, without arguments, without scenes, without revealing what he knew. She whispered, "You were investigating me." "No. I was protecting myself." The distinction mattered. She recognized that. Yet she had no response. The house became quiet again. Outside snow slid from the roof with a heavy thud. Neither reacted. After several moments, Camilla spoke again. "Is there someone else?" Mark almost smiled. "No." "You don't believe that?" "I know myself." "You've already moved on." "I've accepted reality." "That's different." She leaned against the counter. "I didn't think you'd actually leave." "I noticed. You never threatened divorce." "I don't make threats." "What do you make?" "Decisions." The answer settled heavily between them. Camilla slowly sat at the kitchen table. For the first time since receiving the papers, she appeared to understand exactly who her husband had always been. Not passive, patient. There was a difference, a profound one. Her phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen. Tyler Bennett. Mark noticed the name reflected briefly against the black display. He said nothing. She rejected the call. Seconds later it rang again. Again she ignored it. Mark quietly stood. "I'll give you privacy." "No." She looked up quickly. "Stay." He remained standing. She turned the phone face down. "I don't want to answer." Mark simply nodded. The phone rang a third time, then stopped. An incoming message appeared. Another. Then another. Camilla stared at the screen without opening them. Mark walked upstairs to his study. There were no more conversations worth forcing. Half an hour later, his secure work phone vibrated. Special Agent Rebecca Collins. Her voice remained measured. "Mr. Anderson?" "Agent, I need to ask a procedural question." "Go ahead." "Have you informed anyone connected to Bennett Capital about your submission?" "No." "Has anyone indicated they know?" "Not directly." A brief silence followed. "We've observed unusual activity today." Mark listened carefully. "I can't provide details." "I understand. But if anyone attempts to contact you regarding corporate records, financial documents, or your former observations, I should notify you. Immediately." "I will." The call ended. Mark looked through the study window toward the street below. The same black SUV from the previous evening slowly passed the house. It did not stop. It continued around the corner before disappearing. Interesting. Nothing more. He made a note. Time? Vehicle description? Direction of travel? Old habits rarely disappeared. Downstairs, he heard the front door close. Camilla had left. He neither followed nor asked where she had gone. Instead, he opened a folder labeled Personal Timeline. One final entry. January 12th. Divorce papers served, spouse aware. He closed the folder. Across town, Camilla parked outside Tyler Bennett's downtown condominium. The building's doorman recognized her immediately. "Good evening." She hurried past without responding. The elevator carried her to the 21st floor. Tyler opened the door almost instantly. He looked irritated. "What happened?" She held up the divorce papers. "He knows?" Tyler barely glanced at them. So. She stared in disbelief. "He filed." Tyler walked back toward the living room. "I assumed eventually he would." "You told me he wouldn't." "I said he didn't seem like the type." She followed him. "You also said if anything happened, we'd handle it together." Tyler poured himself a drink. "We will." "How?" He shrugged. "Once the divorce is over, everything becomes simpler." Camilla looked unconvinced. "He investigated me." Tyler dismissed the concern with a wave. "Private investigators don't matter." "It wasn't just that." He hired a lawyer weeks ago. So, he planned every step. Tyler finally looked at her. So did we. She hesitated. No, we didn't. His expression hardened. What's that supposed to mean? She remembered the conversation at the restaurant. Mark had removed his wedding ring only after every legal document had already been prepared. Every decision had already been made. She had mistaken silence for helplessness. Now she wasn't so sure. Tyler noticed the change in her expression. You're overthinking. Before she could answer, his own phone rang. He checked the screen. His smile disappeared. Linda Carver. He answered immediately. What is it? The attorney's voice sounded urgent enough that even Camilla could hear fragments. Federal subpoenas. Document preservation. Don't destroy anything. Tyler stood abruptly. What happened? Linda answered for nearly a minute. His face gradually lost color. No. That's impossible. We've been careful. Another pause. I'll be there. He ended the call. For several seconds, he simply stared at the phone. Camilla spoke first. What happened? Tyler slowly looked toward her. Federal investigators. Her heartbeat accelerated. What about them? They're asking questions. What kind of questions? The wrong ones. He immediately walked toward his office, pulled open several desk drawers, collected files, external hard drives, a locked binder. His movements were no longer confident. They were hurried, calculated. Fear had entered the room. Camilla watched silently. For the first time since meeting Tyler Bennett, she saw something she had never imagined possible. The man who always seemed completely in control was suddenly behaving exactly like someone who believed control was slipping away. And somewhere across Columbus, sitting alone in the quiet study of his home, Mark Anderson had no idea that the evidence he had quietly handed to the proper authorities had already begun creating consequences far larger than the end of his marriage. Tuesday morning began before sunrise. Mark Anderson arrived at the Financial Crimes Division at 6:45 a.m., nearly an hour earlier than usual. The office remained dark except for the security lights above the entrance. He unlocked his office, started the coffee maker, reviewed the schedule for the day, 3 fraud interviews, 1 insurance subpoena, 2 financial audits, ordinary work. He appreciated ordinary work. It reminded him that life continued even when marriages ended. At 8:12 a.m., Detective Aaron Mills stepped into his office carrying 2 cups of coffee. You beat me in again. Mark smiled faintly. I couldn't sleep. Aaron handed him a cup. Everything okay? Mark considered the question. It will be. Aaron accepted that answer without pressing further. Professional friendships often relied upon respecting silence. Half an hour later, Karen Whitmore appeared at Mark's doorway. You've got visitors. Who? Federal. Mark looked toward the conference room. Rebecca Collins stood beside another agent he had never met. Neither looked hurried. Neither looked relaxed. Something had changed. Mark greeted them with a handshake. Rebecca spoke first. We appreciate your time. Of course. The conference room door closed behind them. The younger agent introduced himself. Special Agent Daniel Harper. Mark nodded. Rebecca opened a thin folder. We're still in the preliminary stages. I understand. But we have a question that wasn't covered during your original submission. Go ahead. She slid a photograph across the table. It showed one of Bennett Capital's underground parking garages. Several people carried sealed document boxes toward an elevator. Mark immediately recognized one face, Linda Carver. Another belonged to Tyler Bennett. The third, Camilla. Rebecca watched his reaction. You know her. My wife. Rebecca nodded. Former legally speaking? Pending. She made a brief note. Can you identify why she'd be present during corporate document reviews? No. Did she ever discuss Bennett Capital finances? Never. Did she ever ask unusual questions about financial investigations? Mark thought carefully. No. Rebecca exchanged a glance with Daniel Harper. We're not suggesting wrongdoing. I understand. We're trying to establish who had access. Mark appreciated the distinction. Evidence required precision, not assumptions. The interview continued another 20 minutes. Every question remained focused on timelines, meetings, observations, nothing personal beyond what had already become relevant. Finally, Rebecca closed the folder. You've been extremely helpful. I hope so. She stood. If anyone contacts you attempting to influence your testimony or obtain information about this inquiry, I'll notify you immediately. Good. After they left, Aaron stepped into the conference room. You okay? Mark nodded. Just another interview. Aaron studied him for a moment. You always look calmer after talking to federal agents. Mark smiled. They ask direct questions. I like direct questions. Aaron laughed. I noticed. Meanwhile, across the city, Tyler Bennett had abandoned every trace of his usual confidence. The executive conference room inside Bennett Capital no longer hosted polished investment presentations. Instead, every chair was occupied by attorneys. Boxes covered the conference table, financial statements, corporate ledgers, electronic storage drives. Linda Carver stood near the window reviewing several legal documents. We've received preservation notices. Tyler paced slowly. They don't have enough. Linda looked up. You don't know that. They're fishing. They may be. She closed the folder. But if they already possess internal accounting records, Tyler stopped walking. They don't. Linda held his gaze. Can you guarantee that? Silence answered her. That silence concerned every attorney in the room. One partner finally spoke. If anyone inside cooperated, Tyler interrupted. No one did. Linda remained unconvinced. What about consultants? They signed confidentiality agreements. What about accountants? They signed them too. What about former employees? Tyler rubbed his forehead. I've covered every angle. Linda quietly replied, No one ever covers every angle. The room fell silent again. Back at his office, Mark spent the afternoon reviewing healthcare fraud reports. His concentration remained steady. He no longer checked his personal phone every few minutes. He no longer wondered where Camilla might be. The uncertainty that had dominated his thoughts for months had disappeared. Around 4 o'clock, Susan Keller called. The temporary financial orders have been approved. Any objections? Not yet. Has she retained counsel? She has. Mark expected that. Who? Brian Sullivan. Mark recognized the name. Experienced, practical, well-respected. Susan continued. I've dealt with him before. Fair. Usually. Good. There's something else. What? His office requested settlement discussions. So soon, yes. Mark wasn't surprised. People who expected emotional conflict often hoped to negotiate before facts became unavoidable. Schedule them. You'll attend? I will. After hanging up, Mark closed his laptop. Another step completed. No celebration. No relief. Only progress. That evening, Camilla met with Brian Sullivan for the first time. His office overlooked Capitol Square. Shelves lined with legal textbooks surrounded the conference table. He had already reviewed the divorce petition before she arrived. After introductions, he asked only one question. Tell me what happened. Camilla spoke for nearly 30 minutes. She described the anniversary dinner, the wedding ring, the investigation, the sudden divorce filing. She omitted nothing except Tyler Bennett. Brian listened carefully. When she finished, he folded his hands. I need to ask something uncomfortable. She nodded. Go ahead. Were you involved with another man? She hesitated, only briefly. Yes. Brian sighed quietly. When did your husband learn? I don't know exactly. When did he confront you? He never really did. Brian leaned back. He didn't. She shook her head. She searched for the right word. Prepared. Brian remained silent for several moments. Finally, he asked, Did he threaten you? No. Raise his voice? Never. Hide assets? No. Attempt revenge? No. Brian slowly closed the file. I'll be honest. She waited. This is going to be a difficult case. She frowned. Why? Because judges pay attention to behavior. He behaved reasonably. So, Brian looked directly at her. So did he. The words settled heavily over the room. Brian continued, If everything you've told me is accurate, and your husband appears to have handled an emotionally devastating situation with unusual restraint. Camilla lowered her eyes. I know. That matters. She whispered, I didn't expect him to. Brian nodded. Most people don't. When the meeting ended, Camilla sat alone in her car for nearly 20 minutes. For the first time, someone completely outside the marriage had described Mark exactly as he truly was. Reasonable, prepared, restrained. She remembered laughing at him across the dinner table, calling him predictable, calling him a mistake. Now those words echoed differently inside her memory. Not because they had become untrue, because she had finally understood the man listening to them. Across town, Mark returned home shortly after 7. The house remained quiet. Camilla had not yet returned. He prepared a simple dinner: grilled chicken, rice, steamed vegetables. He ate alone without noticing the silence. Later, while washing the dishes, his secure phone vibrated again. Rebecca Collins. Her voice remained calm. Mr. Anderson? Agent, I wanted to thank you personally. For what? Today. You've made our job considerably easier. Mark looked through the kitchen window into the darkness. I'm glad. Rebecca paused. One more thing. Yes. We executed our first preservation orders this evening. Mark understood exactly what that meant. The investigation had quietly moved beyond paperwork. It had entered the next phase. Somewhere inside Bennett Capital, people were about to discover that the quiet man they had never considered important had already placed events into motion that no amount of money could stop. Wednesday morning began with rain. The overnight snow had melted into narrow streams that ran along the curbs outside the Financial Crimes Division. Columbus looked gray beneath heavy clouds, and commuters hurried through the damp streets with their collars raised against the cold wind. Mark Anderson noticed none of it. He arrived at work precisely at 7:30. Routine remained his strongest ally. He reviewed overnight reports, answered 3 emails, signed 2 warrant requests prepared by junior investigators. At 9:18 a.m., his receptionist called. Mr. Anderson, your attorney is online too. Mark picked up immediately. Susan. Good morning. Her voice carried the calm professionalism he had come to expect. We've received your wife's financial disclosures. Anything unusual? A few omissions. Mark waited. Susan continued. Nothing dramatic. But several investment transfers occurred during the past 6 months. Personal accounts? No. They involve accounts connected to Bennett Capital executives. Mark remained silent. Susan understood exactly why. I'm not saying they're improper. I know. I'm simply saying the timing is interesting. When do you need my response? Tomorrow afternoon. I'll have everything ready. The conversation ended. Mark opened a folder containing 12 years of financial records. Every tax return, every mortgage payment, every retirement contribution, every shared investment. He had preserved them long before hiring Susan. Preparation was rarely exciting. It was simply effective. Across town, Tyler Bennett stood inside the executive boardroom surrounded by anxious directors. The atmosphere had changed completely. No one discussed expansion plans. No one talked about new investors. Every conversation revolved around subpoenas, audits, compliance reviews. Linda Carver placed another envelope onto the conference table. This arrived 20 minutes ago. Tyler opened it. His jaw tightened. Another request. Linda nodded. They're asking for internal communication records. One board member looked confused. How serious is this? Linda answered carefully. Federal agencies don't request this volume of documentation unless they're building timelines. Another executive asked quietly, "Can we fight it? We can challenge portions. But delaying isn't the same as winning." Tyler pushed the papers aside. "They're trying to pressure us." Linda didn't disagree. "They're also being methodical." Methodical. The word irritated Tyler more than any accusation. Everything about the investigation felt controlled, measured, deliberate. Someone had assembled information patiently over time. He still couldn't understand how. Meanwhile, Camilla sat alone in a downtown coffee shop, staring into a cup that had gone cold nearly an hour earlier. Her phone remained silent. Tyler had barely answered her messages since Monday. Every conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. Every reply sounded distracted. She replayed Saturday night's dinner repeatedly inside her mind. Mark removing his wedding ring, his calm voice, his refusal to argue, his final sentence. "I needed to hear you say the truth." At the time, she had interpreted those words as surrender. Now she wondered whether they had been something else entirely. She reached for her phone, scrolled through old photographs, vacations, Christmas mornings, Rachel's college graduation, Brian's wedding, Mark smiling quietly from the edge of every picture, never trying to dominate the moment, never demanding attention, simply present. She realized something uncomfortable. She couldn't remember the last time she had actually looked at him instead of merely assuming she knew him. Her phone vibrated. "Tyler." She answered immediately. "Hi." "I can't talk long." His voice sounded tense. "We need to avoid being seen together." She blinked. "What?" "Things are complicated. You said we'd handle this together." "We will." "When?" "I don't know." "Tyler." "I have another call." The line disconnected. Camilla stared at the screen. For the first time, fear replaced certainty. Back at the Financial Crimes Division, Mark completed his financial disclosures before lunch. Every document matched previous tax filings. Every asset could be verified. Every transfer carried supporting records. Karen Whitmore stopped by his office. "You make paperwork look relaxing." Mark smiled. "I've seen enough messy files." "So have I." She glanced toward the neatly stacked folders. "I wish everyone prepared like you." Mark closed the final binder. "Preparation saves time." "It also saves arguments." Karen laughed. "Maybe I should tell that to my husband." At exactly 1:45 p.m., Special Agent Rebecca Collins called again. "Mr. Anderson, Agent." "I won't keep you long." "I'm listening." "We've completed our first round of interviews." Mark remained silent. "There may be additional requests for your assistance." "Whenever needed." Rebecca hesitated briefly. "I also wanted to clarify something." "Go ahead." "Your wife has not been identified as a target." Mark quietly exhaled. "I appreciate you telling me." "We follow evidence." "I know." "If that changes, you'll be contacted through proper channels." "I understand." After ending the call, Mark sat quietly for several moments. He had never wanted revenge against Camilla. He wanted accountability where it belonged. If she had broken promises inside a marriage, that was one matter. If others had broken federal law, that was another. Confusing those two issues would only weaken both. Late that afternoon, Susan Keller emailed updated settlement proposals. Mark reviewed every page carefully. The requests were reasonable. Equal division of marital property, retirement adjustments, sale of the family home, no punitive demands, no emotional language, only numbers. He approved them within 15 minutes. That evening, Brian Sullivan met privately with Camilla again. He slid the settlement proposal across the table. "I recommend accepting most of this." She looked surprised. "So quickly?" Brian nodded. "Your husband isn't trying to punish you." She scanned the pages. "He wants to sell the house." "Yes." "He isn't asking for anything extra." "No." She looked confused. "He could." "Legally." "In some areas." He leaned forward. "But he isn't." Camilla slowly closed the folder. "I don't understand." Brian answered honestly. "I think he wants closure more than victory." Those words stayed with her. Closure, not victory. She had spent weeks believing Mark wanted to expose her, humiliate her, destroy her. Instead, he appeared determined to end the marriage with the same discipline that had guided every other part of his life. She drove home just after sunset. Mark sat in the living room reading another history book. Nothing about him suggested triumph. Nothing suggested bitterness. Only quiet. She stood in the doorway. "Can we talk?" He closed the book. "Of course." She remained standing. "My attorney showed me the settlement." "I assumed he would." "You aren't trying to take everything." "No?" "Why?" Mark looked at her calmly. "Because the marriage already cost enough." She lowered her eyes. "I don't deserve kindness." "This isn't kindness." "What is it?" He answered without hesitation. "It's the difference between ending a marriage and losing yourself while doing it." Camilla felt tears rising unexpectedly. She blinked them away. Mark noticed. He said nothing. Some emotions needed no audience. Upstairs, the house remained quiet. Outside rain continued falling across the empty street. Neither of them noticed the unmarked government sedan parked half a block away. Inside sat two federal agents quietly observing another residence. Not Mark's. The home belonged to Bennett Capital's chief financial officer. By sunrise, the investigation would move beyond preserving evidence. It would begin confronting the people responsible for creating it. And when that happened, every carefully hidden secret would begin surfacing one document at a time. Thursday arrived with clear skies. The rain had washed the streets clean, leaving downtown Columbus bright beneath a pale winter sun. Office workers hurried toward glass buildings carrying coffee cups and briefcases, unaware that several federal investigations were about to become public. Mark Anderson reached his office shortly before 8. His routine never changed. He reviewed overnight reports, checked the day's appointments, signed 2 investigative summaries. The predictability grounded him. He no longer measured his mornings by thoughts of Camilla. He measured them by work completed. At 8:43 a.m., Special Agent Rebecca Collins called. Her voice sounded more formal than usual. "Mr. Anderson?" "Good morning. I wanted to inform you before today's news cycle begins." Mark remained silent. "This morning we executed multiple federal search warrants." He slowly leaned back in his chair. "I see." "I can't discuss evidence." "I understand. But I can tell you the investigation is no longer confidential." "Thank you for letting me know." Rebecca paused. "Your cooperation helped establish the initial timeline." Mark looked through his office window. "I only provided what I observed. Sometimes that's enough." The call ended. He sat quietly for several seconds. No satisfaction crossed his face, only reflection. Evidence had reached its destination. The system was now doing what it had been designed to do. He trusted that process. Across town, chaos erupted inside Bennett Capital. Federal agents entered the building shortly after 8:30. Receptionists froze. Executives exchanged frightened looks. Employees whispered as identification badges flashed beneath government credentials. Boxes of records disappeared into secure evidence containers. Computer servers were photographed. Hard drives were cataloged. No one raised their voice. No dramatic confrontation unfolded. Everything happened with disciplined precision. Tyler Bennett watched from his office doorway. His expensive suit no longer projected confidence, only exhaustion. Linda Carver approached quietly. They're serving every department. Tyler looked toward the elevators where additional agents continued arriving. This wasn't supposed to happen, Linda answered honestly. It already has. One investigator approached Tyler. Mr. Bennett. Yes. We have a warrant authorizing collection of specific financial records. Tyler accepted the paperwork. His attorney immediately stepped beside him. We'll cooperate within the scope required. The agent nodded professionally. That's all we're asking. No threats, no accusations, simply procedure. Tyler realized something unsettling. Nobody appeared interested in arguing. They already knew exactly what they wanted. At almost the same moment, every major business news website in Columbus published identical headlines. Federal investigation targets Bennett. Capital, financial practices. The story spread quickly. Television stations interrupted regular programming. Social media exploded with speculation. Within an hour, investors began calling. Clients demanded explanations. Board members requested emergency meetings. The company Tyler had spent years building started losing credibility by the minute. Camilla first saw the headline while standing in line at a grocery store. She stared at her phone. Read the article once. Then again. No criminal charges had been announced. No conclusions had been reached, only confirmed facts. Federal search warrants, document seizures, ongoing investigation. Her heartbeat accelerated. She immediately called Tyler. No answer. She tried again. Voicemail. Again. Nothing. By the fourth attempt, she stopped calling. A cold realization settled over her. When everything had seemed exciting, Tyler had called constantly. Now that consequences had appeared, silence. She abandoned her shopping cart and drove home. Mark was already there. He had taken the afternoon off for scheduled settlement discussions with Susan Keller. Several folders rested neatly across the dining room table. Camilla entered quietly. He looked up. You're home early. She nodded. You've seen the news? Yes. She studied his expression carefully. Nothing. No smile. No triumph. No hint that he viewed the investigation as personal revenge. She sat opposite him. Were you expecting this? I expected the authorities to do their jobs. You already knew. I knew what I submitted. She looked toward the folders. You planned everything. Mark gently shook his head. No. I documented everything. Another distinction. Another quiet correction. Camilla lowered her eyes. I thought you wanted to destroy him. Mark answered immediately. If I wanted that, I would have gone to the media. She slowly looked back up. But you didn't. No. Why? Because headlines aren't evidence. Those words lingered between them. Camilla finally understood the difference between anger and discipline. Anger wanted immediate satisfaction. Discipline trusted time. That afternoon, Susan Keller arrived for the scheduled meeting. She spread updated settlement documents across the dining room table. Brian Sullivan joined through a secure video conference. Professional, efficient, respectful. The discussion lasted nearly 2 hours. Property valuations, retirement accounts, future tax responsibilities. Everything remained civil. At one point, Brian looked toward Camilla. I recommend accepting this division. She quietly nodded. I will. Susan made several notes. Mark signed where necessary. No arguments occurred. No raised voices. The marriage that had once promised forever ended through signatures instead of accusations. As the meeting concluded, Brian spoke privately to Camilla. "I'll say something outside my role." She listened. "Your husband has conducted himself exceptionally well." She gave a faint smile. "I know. I don't think you realized that before." "No, I didn't." Brian disconnected. Susan gathered her files. Before leaving, she paused beside Mark. "You handled this better than most clients." Mark answered softly. "I had good advice." She smiled. "You followed it." When the front door closed, silence returned to the house. Camilla remained seated. The divorce papers rested between them. Only a few signatures remained before the process became final. She looked toward Mark. "I've been thinking." He waited. "I kept believing you were weak." He said nothing. "I confused quiet with weakness." Mark folded the final document. "Many people do." She swallowed hard. "I hurt you." "Yes. I can't change that." "No." Tears filled her eyes. "I wish I had understood sooner." Mark looked at her for a long moment. His voice stayed calm. "I believe you." She blinked. "You do?" "Yes." "Then why can't we start over?" The question hung in the quiet room. Outside, winter sunlight stretched across the empty yard. Mark answered without hesitation. "Because understanding arrived. After the choices." She closed her eyes. No argument remained. Nothing left to defend. Only consequences. Her phone vibrated. Another message from Tyler. The first in nearly 2 days. She opened it. "Need some distance right now. Don't contact me until things settle down." That was all. No reassurance, no promise, no affection. Only self-preservation. She stared at the screen, then quietly deleted the message. Without speaking, she set the phone face down on the table. For the first time since the affair had begun, she understood exactly what she had traded away. Not merely a marriage, but the one person who had remained steady even while preparing to walk away. Mark returned his attention to the final documents. The signatures would be completed soon. The legal ending was close, but beyond the divorce, another ending had already begun. Across the city, Tyler Bennett's carefully constructed reputation continued collapsing beneath the weight of evidence he never imagined a quiet husband had helped place into the hands of investigators. And this time, no amount of money influence or charm would be enough to stop what came next. 3 months later, the first hearing concluded in less than 20 minutes. Mark Anderson left the Franklin County Courthouse carrying only a thin folder and his winter coat. Snow had disappeared from Columbus, replaced by the first signs of spring. Trees along High Street showed small green buds, and people hurried through the sunshine without paying attention to the quiet man walking toward the parking garage. The divorce itself had never become complicated. The paperwork had been accurate. The disclosures had been complete. Neither attorney had wasted time arguing over facts that could already be verified. Mark appreciated that. Truth shortened conversations. As he reached his truck, his phone vibrated. "Susan Keller. We're finished with today's hearing." "I gathered that." She laughed softly. "I wanted to tell you personally." "The judge complimented your documentation after you left." Mark unlocked the driver's door. "That's kind of him." "It's unusual. He said cases become easier when people prepare honestly." Mark thanked her. Before ending the call, Susan added one final thought. "You're almost at the finish line." "I know." He started the engine. For the first time in months, the word finish no longer sounded painful. It sounded peaceful. Across the city, Tyler Bennett's situation looked very different. Federal investigators had spent weeks reviewing seized records. Former employees had been interviewed. Banks had produced loan files. Accounting firms had surrendered years of correspondence. Every new document answered one question while creating 3 more. Tyler no longer appeared on magazine covers. Television interviews disappeared. Speaking invitations were quietly canceled. Investors who had once competed for meetings suddenly stopped returning calls. His attorneys advised silence. His public relations firm advised patience. Neither recommendation restored the confidence he had lost. Inside his office, once filled with executives and developers, only Linda Carver remained. She closed another thick binder. The government has expanded the investigation. Tyler rubbed his tired eyes. How much? They're reviewing transactions involving at least 14 commercial properties. I told you those were legitimate. Linda looked directly at him. I know what you told me. He lowered his voice. You don't believe me anymore. I believe documents. The sentence lingered between them. Tyler had built an empire by convincing people. Investigators built cases by verifying records. Those were entirely different skills. He stood and walked toward the window overlooking downtown Columbus. Traffic continued below exactly as it always had. The city wasn't waiting for him. Life had continued without asking permission. Meanwhile, Camilla had moved into a small apartment on the northwest side of the city. The luxury condominium Tyler once promised never materialized. Neither did weekend trips. Neither did discussions about a future together. Most evenings, she returned from work to a quiet apartment with white walls and unopened moving boxes. The silence no longer felt temporary. It felt deserved. Rachel Simmons stopped calling after Bennett. Capital appeared in the news. Business acquaintances disappeared almost overnight. People who once admired appearances suddenly preferred distance. Camilla understood why. She had once judged people the same way. One Saturday afternoon, she visited a neighborhood bookstore. Without planning to, without knowing exactly why. As she wandered through the aisles, a familiar memory surfaced. 12 years earlier, she had met Mark in a bookstore almost exactly like this one. He had smiled awkwardly while reaching for the same book. Neither of them had cared about expensive cars. Neither had spoken about money. They had simply enjoyed each other's company. She stood silently before the business section until an employee asked whether she needed help. No, she answered gently. I just remembered something. She left without buying anything. That evening she wrote a letter, not because she expected forgiveness, because some words deserved to exist, even if nobody answered them. She wrote slowly. Every sentence felt heavier than the one before. She apologized for confusing patience with weakness. She admitted that admiration for wealth had slowly replaced gratitude. She acknowledged that Mark had never deceived her. She had deceived herself. When she finished, she placed the letter inside a simple envelope. No perfume, no dramatic language, no requests, only honesty. The following Monday, she knocked on the front door of the house that was no longer hers. Mark answered after a few moments. He looked surprised, not uncomfortable, just surprised. She held out the envelope. I wrote something. He accepted it. Thank you. I don't need an answer. He nodded once. I understand. She hesitated. I meant what I wrote. I believe you. Another silence settled between them, very different from the silence they had shared months earlier. This one carried no anger, only acceptance. She looked around the familiar entryway one last time. I hope you're happy, Mark answered honestly. I'm becoming peaceful. A faint smile crossed her face. That sounds like you. She turned and walked back toward her car. Mark waited until she had driven away before opening the envelope. He read every word carefully. Twice. Nothing inside changed the past. Nothing erased betrayal. Nothing restored trust. But the apology contained something genuine, responsibility. When he finished reading, he folded the pages neatly. He placed them inside a storage box beside old family photographs and the framed wedding picture he had packed away months earlier. Not because he intended to revisit them often, because even painful chapters remained part of a person's life. Destroying them never changed what had happened. Learning from them could. Late that afternoon, Rebecca Collins called one final time. "Mr. Anderson?" "Agent. I thought you should know." "I'm listening." "The investigation has reached the grand jury." Mark stood quietly beside the kitchen window. "I appreciate you telling me. I can't discuss anything further." "I wouldn't ask." She paused. "I also wanted to thank you." "For what?" "You never tried to become the investigator. You stayed a witness." Mark smiled faintly. "That's where I belonged." It made all the difference. After the call ended, he looked outside. A young family walked past the house. Two children chased each other across the sidewalk while their parents laughed behind them. Ordinary life. The kind of life Mark had nearly forgotten to notice. His phone remained silent. No emergencies, no legal questions, no investigators, no attorneys. Only quiet. He poured a cup of coffee and carried it onto the back porch. The evening sun settled low across the yard. Birds returned to trees that had stood empty all winter. Mark leaned back in the old wooden chair he had repaired years earlier. For the first time since removing his wedding ring at that anniversary dinner, he realized something important. Justice had never healed him. Preparation had protected him. Truth had guided him. Time had done the healing. And somewhere downtown, inside a federal courthouse, where documents spoke louder than excuses, the final consequences for Tyler Bennett were moving steadily forward without needing Mark to say another word. 6 months later, the divorce became final. There was no dramatic courtroom exchange, no last-minute confession, no emotional plea. The judge reviewed the settlement agreement, confirmed that both parties understood its terms, and signed the final order. The marriage officially ended in less than 15 minutes. Mark Anderson thanked Susan Keller outside the courtroom. "You earned a quiet ending," she said. Mark smiled. "I earned peace." "There's a difference." "I know." They shook hands before walking in opposite directions. Neither looked back. Outside, summer had settled over Columbus. The courthouse steps were crowded with families, attorneys, reporters, and tourists taking photographs beneath a cloudless sky. Life moved forward without waiting for anyone. Mark appreciated that more than he ever had before. He drove to his office for what would become his final week with the Financial Crimes Division. Earlier that spring, he had accepted a position teaching financial investigation techniques at the Ohio Peace Officer Training Academy. The decision surprised many coworkers. Karen Whitmore asked him why he would leave active investigations. Mark answered simply, "I've spent 20 years solving yesterday's crimes. I'd like to help prevent tomorrow's." That sounded exactly like him. His office looked almost empty now. Most books had already been boxed. Family photographs had been taken home. Only a framed certificate and a small potted fern remained on the bookshelf. Aaron Mills leaned against the doorway. "So it's really happening." Mark nodded. "It is. You'll miss this place." "I'll miss the people." Aaron laughed. "You won't miss the paperwork." "I definitely won't." They spent the next hour sharing stories from old investigations. Cases that had taken years, mistakes that had become lessons, victories that had never appeared in newspapers. When Aaron finally stood to leave, he paused. "I've always admired one thing about you." Mark looked up. "What?" "You never let anger become evidence." After Aaron left, Mark remained seated for several minutes. That sentence summarized an entire career, and perhaps an entire life. Across town, Tyler Bennett entered a federal courthouse through a side entrance reserved for defendants and attorneys. Months of investigation had produced thousands of pages of financial records. Former executives had agreed to cooperate. Accountants had testified before the grand jury. Bank officials had explained loan approvals. Every carefully hidden transaction had eventually found its place inside a timeline. Money had left fingerprints. Numbers always did. Tyler no longer wore expensive custom suits. The confident smile that once appeared on magazine covers had disappeared. His attorneys spoke quietly as they entered the courtroom. Reporters waited outside. Cameras remained behind security barriers. No one shouted questions. The official filings already spoke loudly enough. Mark never attended. He never watched the news coverage. He never searched the internet for updates. The investigation belonged to the justice system now, exactly where it should remain. Camilla followed the proceedings only through public reports. She had long since stopped communicating with Tyler. His final message months earlier had never been answered. She deleted his number the same day she moved into her apartment. She understood something now that she had failed to understand before. Character revealed itself most clearly when comfort disappeared. Tyler had disappeared. Mark had remained steady. That difference could never be ignored again. One Saturday morning, Camilla volunteered at a neighborhood food pantry. No one there knew her past. No one recognized her from newspaper stories connected to Bennett Capital. People simply appreciated another pair of hands sorting canned goods and greeting families. She found unexpected comfort in work that required no appearances. An elderly volunteer smiled at her. "You've become one of our most reliable helpers." Camilla smiled back. "I'm trying." She meant it, not to erase the past, only to become more honest than she had once been. Late that afternoon, Mark unlocked the door to a small classroom at the training academy. 24 new investigators waited inside. Fresh notebooks rested on every desk. Young faces looked toward him with curiosity. He wrote one sentence across the whiteboard before introducing himself. Facts first, conclusions second. He turned towards the class. "If you remember only one lesson from me, remember those 3 words." One student raised her hand. "Has that rule ever helped outside work?" Mark paused. The classroom became completely quiet. "Yes. It saved my life." He said nothing more. He didn't need to. The lesson would explain itself over time. After class, Mark drove toward a quiet park overlooking Hoover Reservoir. He often came there after long weeks. The walking trail wound through tall trees before opening onto calm water, reflecting the evening sky. He carried no briefcase, no investigation files, no court documents, only a paperback novel tucked beneath one arm. He found an empty bench facing the lake. Children laughed nearby. A couple walked their dog along the shoreline. 2 older men argued cheerfully about baseball scores. Ordinary sounds? The sounds of people living instead of surviving. Mark opened the novel, but didn't immediately begin reading. Instead, he watched sunlight shimmer across the water. He thought briefly about the wedding ring he had removed that night at Prime Oak Steakhouse. It still rested inside a small wooden box at home. Not as a symbol of failure, as a reminder. Promises mattered. Truth mattered more. Footsteps approached the bench. An elderly man carrying fishing equipment nodded politely. "Mind if I sit?" Not at all. They spent nearly half an hour talking about weather fishing and the changing seasons. Nothing personal, nothing profound. When the man finally stood to leave, he smiled. "You seem like someone who's finally enjoying life." Mark looked toward the calm water. "I finally learned how." The fisherman wished him a good evening and walked away. Mark remained until sunset painted the horizon gold. There were no unanswered questions left, no revenge waiting to be completed, no speeches to deliver. Justice had followed its own path. Healing had followed another. Both had required patience. As darkness settled across the reservoir, Mark closed his book, stood from the bench, and began walking toward the parking lot with an unhurried stride. For the first time in many years, he wasn't walking away from betrayal. He was simply walking toward tomorrow. Every difficult season in life leaves us with a choice. We can allow betrayal to make us bitter, or we can let truth make us wiser. Mark never won because he shouted louder, sought revenge, or tried to destroy someone else's life. He won because he stayed patient when others became reckless, because he trusted facts more than emotions, and because he understood that real justice doesn't need anger to survive. In the end, the people who relied on lies were eventually trapped by them, while the man who quietly prepared for the truth found something far more valuable than victory. He found peace. Sometimes the greatest comeback is not proving someone wrong. It's refusing to become someone you're not. Maybe this story reminds you of a chapter from your own life. Perhaps you've been underestimated, betrayed, or judged by appearances. If so, remember that your character is built in the moments when no one is watching. Stay honest, stay patient, keep moving forward. Time has a remarkable way of revealing what words never can. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced a moment when staying calm changed the outcome of your life? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might encourage someone else who needs hope today. And if you enjoy powerful stories about resilience, justice, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Tomorrow's story may be the one that speaks directly to your own journey.